Hey artists, today we're going to make these amazing texture fall trees. Follow along with me and I'll show you all the steps to create your own.
Okay, the first thing we want to do is put our hand at the bottom, and we're going to make a space about as wide as our hand to show where the ground is. We don't want it to be too small because we want to be able to put some leaves and texture down here as well. In the middle, we're going to draw our tree trunk. I'm going to have mine be a little bit windy, and that's all the drawing that we're going to do with the pencil. Now, with your paintbrush, you're going to get your paintbrush wet. I'm going to get some brown paint, and we're going to color our tree trunk. If you want to give it a little more texture, you can go outside your line a little bit. So we're just going to make that nice brown tree trunk. With watercolor, the more layers we put on, kind of the darker it gets. So you can add another layer. And once you're satisfied with the tree trunk, you're going to wash your brush clean. We're going to do half of the paper at a time. So over here, I'm going to add some water to this half of the page. And we call this a wash. We put the water down first to get the paper ready for the paint. Now that the paper is ready, I'm going to get some blue with lots of water on my brush because I want it to be very light, like a nice light fall day. And then you can see how when I add the paint to the already wet paper, it just kind of blends and moves, which is what we want. That's why we put the water down first. Look at the way that paint just moves. It looks so beautiful. And so we're just adding the paint. We can just kind of let it do what it wants to do. I want to be careful because if I get water next to my wet tree trunk, they might start running together, which is okay. It's kind of a cool look, but if you don't want that, you keep them separate. I like how it looks when the paint kind of takes a life of its own, so I'm not going back and forth with my brush. I'm kind of letting the paint do what it wants because I think that looks so cool. I just add some more. Look at that. So cool. Okay. Now that I have that side done, I'm going to wet my brush and do the other side of my page. Now, while this other side is still wet, another way that I could add texture, since this is still nice and wet, is I could take a little bit of salt and sprinkle a little bit of salt onto the wet paint. Once the salt goes on, I cannot touch it. I don't want to put my brush over there or touch it or anything because now it's doing its job. Now while that side is working, I'm gonna go and see this kind of blended out, and that's okay. Getting this side wet. Going to go in here. Ooh, beautiful. Adding that blue sky, all this texture we have. Now we would call this implied texture because if I touch this paper when it's dry, it feels smooth. It doesn't have real 3D texture, but it sure looks textured because of the way we are painting. Now that this side is nice and wet also, I can go ahead and take more salt and sprinkle it on. Not too much, just a drizzle. Okay, now I'm gonna let the salt do its magic, and once it's dry, then we can go in and add some more texture to our picture. All right, as the paper has been drying, I can see where the salt made like these little areas of texture. It kind of pulled the paint up and made these little cool spots. To make some real texture, we're going to take some greens and tans, and we're going to just make some ripped paper that has kind of a fun texture at the end. and we're gonna glue it down for the ground. So it's like the grass in the fall is still gonna have some green, but there's also gonna be some brown fallen leaves, and we're just gonna put these colors together to make texture on the ground. Now when I rip, I want to make sure it's big enough that I can put the glue stick on. If you are ripping pieces this big, it's going to make you go crazy. Don't do it. So we're just going to do these bigger pieces here. Maybe a little bit of this tan color too. And we're going to use a glue stick and just glue them on and layer up the grass area. So I've got my glue stick ready, and I'm just going to start putting my colors down. We can kind of mix them up a little, just making this really nice textured ground. And what I like about this is as we put paper on top of the other pieces of paper, it adds even more texture because there's layers. So we're not putting glue all over the paper. We just put a little strip of glue onto the little page and then put it onto the paper. So it's like a little circle of glue and then set it down. All right, already I'm seeing lots of texture on the ground, showing us some of the grass poking through and some of the fallen leaves from under the tree. And we're just gonna keep building up this part of our page with real texture. As I get to the edge here, I can put the straight side right there on the edge of my paper and then add my texture on top. This is going to take us a minute, so take your time, add your layers. That is looking like a really cool ground for underneath my tree. So go ahead and finish putting all the different pieces onto your paper to fill in all this white space and show the ground under the tree. All right, all of the ground looks so cool with this real texture that I can feel with the layers of paper for the ground. Now we're going to do an implied texture by using a sponge. So the sponge is just slightly wet, and I'm just gonna gently tap a little onto the red. I like to touch the plate a little bit to make sure I don't have too much paint on my sponge. And I'm going to start sponging on, oh wow, that looks so cool. Start sponging on the leaves for my tree. So I'm just gonna go around here, add that red. I love those bright red trees in the fall. Looks so cool. So I'm making sure to leave a little bit of space so I can really see that texture. If I put too much, it's gonna get real solid. But leaving a little space, I can see that cool sponge texture, which looks neat. Now, as I do this, I could also have like a couple stray leaves falling down to the ground. I might even have a couple leaves that have fallen onto the ground. Then I can dip into my orange. I don't need to rinse because if these colors mix a little bit, it just makes another beautiful autumn color. So I can add some of this beautiful orange to my tree. This tree is looking amazing. Maybe I'll stretch it out a little more. And maybe I'll have a couple of my little orange pieces fall down onto the ground and around. This is looking great. The next color that goes with my fall leaves is this bright, bright yellow. So I could add some little pieces of yellow on here to show where the leaves are turning a nice yellow color. Looking beautiful. I want to make sure I leave some of the orange and the red behind so I can see a little bit of all of it. Looking really cool. And then maybe I will have a couple of yellow leaves falling from the sky and down here falling onto the ground. And once you are satisfied with the leaves on your tree and the leaves falling from the tree and onto the ground, then you are finished with your texture autumn tree. I can't wait to see the one that you create.